The last thing I expected that Thursday afternoon was to see my husband holding another woman's hand. "Stop calling me, I'm in an important meeting." That was what Greg snapped at me before hanging up. The call lasted maybe 4 seconds. I stared at my phone in the parking lot of Kroger on East 146th Street in Carmel, Indiana. My grocery cart sat beside me, half full of things we supposedly needed for the weekend. Hamburger buns, paper towels, coffee creamer. Normal married life stuff, the kind of stuff that suddenly felt ridiculous. Not because of what he said, because of how he said it. After 23 years of marriage, you learn a person's moods the way farmers learn weather patterns. You don't always know exactly what's coming, but you know when something feels wrong. And something felt wrong. I stood there for a moment looking at the phone. Then I told myself to stop being dramatic. People have bad days. People get stressed. People snap. I finished shopping and drove home. At 48 years old, I'd spent most of my adult life making excuses for other people's behavior. Especially Greg's. When we first met, he was funny, confident. The kind of man who could walk into a room and somehow know everybody within 10 minutes. Back then, I loved that about him. Lately, though, it felt different. Over the past year, he'd become distracted. Protective of his phone. Suddenly interested in his appearance. New shirts. New cologne. Extra trips to the gym. The kind of changes people notice but don't necessarily want to think about too hard. Our daughter Emily certainly noticed. She was 21 and attending Purdue University. A few months earlier, she'd asked me, "Mom, is Dad okay? He seems different." I had immediately defended him. Work stress, management pressure, travel, the usual explanations. Now, standing in my kitchen unloading groceries, I found myself remembering that conversation. At 3:30 that afternoon, I changed clothes and headed downtown. I served on a volunteer board connected to a local literacy program. We had a meeting scheduled near Monument Circle in Indianapolis. Nothing unusual. Nothing remarkable. Just another Thursday. At least that's what I thought. Traffic was heavier than normal coming into downtown. Construction seemed to be everywhere these days. I parked in a garage a few blocks away and started walking. The September weather was beautiful. Clear sky. Comfortable temperature. The kind of day that makes Indiana look better than outsiders expect. As I crossed Illinois Street, I happened to glance toward the entrance of the Hyatt Regency. And that's when my entire world tilted sideways. At first, I only recognized Greg from behind. The walk. The shoulders. The navy sport coat. I actually smiled for a second. Maybe his meeting had ended early. Maybe I could surprise him. Then I saw her. A blonde woman. Maybe 35. Attractive. Professional looking. Close enough to him that there wasn't much room for misunderstanding. She laughed at something he said. Then she touched his arm. Not casually. Not professionally. The way someone touches a person they know very well. I stopped walking. People moved around me on the sidewalk. A couple tourists nearly bumped into me. I didn't move. I couldn't. My husband wrapped his hand around hers, and together they walked into the hotel. I wish I could tell you I immediately marched inside and confronted them. I wish I could tell you I was brave. But that's not what happened. The truth is much less impressive. I followed them. Quietly. Carefully. And I felt sick. The hotel lobby was busy enough that nobody noticed me. I stayed back near a seating area. Greg and the woman approached the front desk. I watched them speak with an employee. The clerk smiled, typed something, handed over room keys. 2 keys. 1 room. 1 reservation. No confusion. No explanation. No innocent misunderstanding. Just 2 people checking into a hotel together. I remember gripping the strap of my purse so hard my fingers hurt. My first thought wasn't anger. It was embarrassment. Because suddenly dozens of little moments from the previous year began fitting together. Business trips. Late meetings. Canceled plans. Texts answered hours later. Everything started making sense. And I hated that it made sense. Greg took the woman's suitcase. They headed toward the elevators. Neither one looked back. Within seconds, they disappeared. I remained frozen where I stood. A middle-aged woman sitting alone in a hotel lobby, trying not to cry. I finally left after about 20 minutes. I don't remember much about the drive home. I remember missing my turn once. I remember sitting at a red light and realizing it had turned green. Mostly I remember silence, the kind that settles over you after a shock. Greg didn't come home until after 9. I was sitting at the kitchen table pretending to read. He walked in carrying his laptop bag, looking completely normal. "Hey," he said, just like that. "Hey," as if I hadn't watched him check into a hotel room with another woman 6 hours earlier. Long day, I asked. He loosened his tie. You have no idea. I looked at him, really looked at him, waiting for some sign of guilt, some sign of shame. There was nothing, just calm confidence. The confidence of someone who believed he wasn't caught. He opened the refrigerator, asked what was for dinner, talked about sales numbers, mentioned a client meeting. The lies came so naturally that it almost impressed me. Almost. That night I barely slept. Greg slept beside me as peacefully as a child. Meanwhile, my mind replayed the hotel scene over and over. Around 2 a.m, I got out of bed, walked downstairs, made tea, sat alone in the dark kitchen. For the first time in 23 years, I seriously considered the possibility that I didn't actually know the man I'd married. And somehow that hurt even more than the affair itself. Because if Greg could lie this easily, what else had he been hiding? At the time, I thought discovering the other woman was the worst part. I had no idea the hotel wasn't the real story. It was only the beginning. The next morning, I almost convinced myself not to do anything. That may sound strange after what I'd seen, but people who've been married a long time will understand. You don't throw away 23 years in a single night. At least not emotionally. I made coffee, fed our golden retriever Tucker, answered emails, folded laundry. I went through all the ordinary motions of life while pretending my marriage hadn't cracked wide open. Greg sat across from me at breakfast reading news on his phone. Every so often he smiled at something on the screen. I wondered if she was texting him. The thought made me lose my appetite. You okay? He asked. I'm fine. The lie came easier than I expected. Apparently we were both practicing. For several days I did nothing. I told myself I needed proof. Then I told myself proof didn't matter because I'd already seen enough. Then I changed my mind again. The truth was simple. I was scared. Scared of divorce. Scared of being alone. Scared of discovering things that would hurt even worse. The following Tuesday, my friend Sharon noticed something was wrong. We met for lunch at a small cafe in Fisher's. Halfway through my sandwich, she put down her iced tea. Diane, what? Either tell me what's happening or stop pretending. I laughed despite myself. She had known me for nearly 20 years. There was no fooling her. So I told her. Everything. The phone call. The hotel. The woman. The room keys. By the time I finished, Sharon looked ready to commit a felony. Oh, I hate him. I actually smiled. That's probably premature. No, I've met Greg. That made me laugh harder than it should have. For a moment the tension eased. Then reality returned. What am I supposed to do? I asked. Sharon thought for a moment. Find out the truth. The simplicity of the answer stayed with me. Find out the truth. Not start a war. Not file papers immediately. Just find out the truth. 3 days later, I found myself driving back to the Hyatt Regency. I didn't have a real plan. Just instinct. Part of me felt ridiculous. What were the odds I'd see them again? Almost none. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling. The same feeling that had bothered me after Greg's phone call. Sometimes your instincts whisper before facts arrive. I parked across the street shortly before noon. The hotel entrance remained busy. Business travelers. Tourists. Convention attendees. People moving through ordinary lives. I sat in my car watching. 1 hour passed. Then another. At around 2:10 p.m. I saw them. My heart nearly stopped. Greg. The blonde woman. Walking together toward the front desk. I ducked lower in my seat even though they couldn't possibly see me. Somehow I'd found them again. I hurried inside. The lobby was crowded. I stayed near a gift shop where I could observe without being obvious. Greg looked relaxed. Confident. The woman laughed at something he said. They approached the front desk. An employee typed on a computer. Then something unexpected happened. The clerk disappeared briefly into a back office. When she returned, she wasn't carrying a receipt. She was carrying a thick manila folder. The moment Greg saw it, everything changed. His smile vanished. Not gradually. Instantly. The color drained from his face. The woman looked confused. The clerk said something. Greg grabbed the folder. Opened it. Read the first page. For a second, I honestly thought he might faint. The woman leaned toward him. What is it? Even from a distance, I could tell she was worried. Greg snapped the folder shut. Let's go. They hurried toward the exit. No smiling. No flirting. No casual conversation. Just panic. Pure panic. I stood there stunned. The affair had been obvious. This wasn't. Whatever was inside that folder terrified him. And that frightened me more than the cheating. Because people don't react like that over flowers, hotel bills, or surprise gifts. They react like that when something dangerous appears. I followed them outside. Not closely. just enough to keep them in sight. Greg drove away so fast he nearly clipped another vehicle leaving the parking garage. The woman followed in her own car. I sat in my Honda for several minutes trying to process what I'd witnessed. Eventually I drove home. Greg arrived less than 30 minutes later. Earlier than usual? Much earlier? The moment he entered the house, he headed straight for his home office. The door locked. A first. Over the years, he'd worked from home occasionally. He'd never locked that door. Not once. For the next 3 hours, he remained inside. No television. No phone conversations. Nothing. Just silence. Around 7, he emerged looking exhausted. "Dinner?" I asked. "I'm not hungry." Another first. Greg never skipped dinner. He went upstairs shortly afterward. I waited. Patiently. Carefully. The way people do when they're afraid of what they might discover. Later that night, I emptied the kitchen trash. Then the bathroom trash. Then finally the office trash. I felt ridiculous. And guilty. And desperate. Mostly desperate. Near the bottom of the basket, I found shredded paper. Lots of it. Tiny strips. Dozens of pieces. Someone had clearly destroyed documents by hand. I carried everything downstairs. Spread the fragments across the dining room table. For nearly 2 hours, I played a miserable version of a jigsaw puzzle. Most pieces revealed nothing. Random words. Partial numbers. Broken sentences. Then I found something. A business card fragment. 3 words remained visible. Martin. Private. Investigations. I stared at it. Private investigator. Why would Greg be dealing with a private investigator? A few minutes later, I found another piece. This one contained part of a sentence. Pending civil action. Another fragment mentioned company records. Then another referenced financial documents. None of it made complete sense, but a pattern was beginning to emerge. And it had nothing to do with romance. The next morning I called Sharon. "You were right." "I usually am." I ignored that. "There may be something else going on." I explained everything. The folder. The panic. The shredded documents. The investigator. The lawsuit language. For several seconds she said nothing. Finally she spoke. "Diane." "What?" "I don't think the affair is the biggest problem anymore." Neither did I. That realization settled heavily over me. For the first time I wondered whether Greg's secret life extended far beyond another woman. A week later, Sharon connected me with a retired investigator named Frank Delaney. He'd spent 30 years with the Indiana State Police before opening a small consulting business. We met at a diner in Noblesville. Frank listened quietly while I explained everything. When I finished, he stirred his coffee. "You want my advice?" "Yes." "Be careful what you wish to find." I frowned. "What does that mean?" He leaned back in the booth. "It means sometimes people start looking for one truth and discover 3 others. The way he said it sent a chill through me. I had gone looking for answers about a cheating husband. Now it felt like I was standing at the edge of something much larger. And something told me the next discovery wasn't going to make my life easier. When people imagine revenge stories, they usually picture a dramatic moment. A confrontation. A screaming match. Someone getting caught in a lie. Real life isn't usually that neat. Most of the time, the truth arrives one uncomfortable piece at a time. And every piece makes you wish you could go back to knowing less. 3 days after meeting Frank Delaney, he called me. His voice was calm. Too calm. "Can you meet this afternoon?" My stomach tightened immediately. "Is it bad?" There was a pause. "Let's just say the affair isn't what I'd be worried about." That was all he said. We met at a coffee shop near downtown Noblesville around 3 o'clock. Frank already had a folder sitting on the table. For a second, I couldn't look at it. I had started this search wanting answers. Now I wasn't sure I wanted them anymore. Frank slid the folder toward me. "What exactly does Greg do for his company these days?" "Regional sales manager." Frank nodded. "That's what I found too." I waited. He folded his hands. "Diane, there appear to be some financial irregularities." The phrase sounded harmless. Almost boring. Then he explained, "It wasn't harmless. And it definitely wasn't boring." Over the previous 3 years, Greg had apparently gained access to several discretionary company accounts connected to travel, client entertainment, and special projects. Normally, those expenses received routine approval. But according to Frank, someone inside the company had recently started asking questions. A lot of questions. Questions about what? Money. The answer landed heavily. Frank opened the folder. Several documents sat inside. Expense reports. Account summaries. Corporate filings. Nothing dramatic. No smoking gun. Just enough information to suggest a pattern. A troubling pattern. It looks like company funds may have been used for things unrelated to company business. I stared at the paperwork. What does that mean? It means somebody may have been moving money around. My mouth suddenly felt dry. Greg, I can't prove that yet, but you think so. Frank gave a small nod. Yes, for several seconds I couldn't speak. Cheating was one thing. Financial misconduct was something entirely different. Then came the part that truly frightened me. Frank pulled out another document. Diane, have you signed any financial forms recently? I frowned. What kind? Loans, retirement paperwork, investment documents? No. He slid the page across the table. My name sat near the bottom, next to a signature. My signature. Except it wasn't. At least not entirely. The shape looked similar. The style looked similar. But it wasn't mine. Someone had copied it. Poorly. My pulse started racing. That's fake. I agree. I looked again. My hands trembled. The document showed authorization connected to a financial account. One I didn't even recognize. Suddenly the room felt smaller. This wasn't just Greg cheating. This wasn't just Greg lying. This involved my name, my future, my legal responsibility. For the first time since all this began, I felt genuine fear. Not heartbreak, not anger, fear. On the drive home, I kept replaying one thought. What if I got blamed for something I didn't do? That night, Greg arrived home around 6:30. As usual, he acted perfectly normal. As usual, I struggled not to scream. We sat across from each other eating grilled chicken and baked potatoes. A married couple sharing dinner. Except we weren't really sharing anything anymore. Finally, I couldn't hold it in. How much trouble are you in? Greg froze. The fork stopped halfway to his mouth. For just a second. Then the expression disappeared. What are you talking about? I watched him carefully. I know about the accounts. Nothing. No reaction. No panic. Just calculation. I have no idea what you're talking about. The lie came smoothly. Professionally. As if he'd rehearsed it. I pushed harder. I know about the forged documents. That got his attention. His eyes narrowed. Who have you been talking to? The question told me everything. Not denial. Not confusion. Fear. I suddenly realized he wasn't worried about our marriage. He was worried about information. For the next 20 minutes we argued. Not loudly. Almost worse than loudly. Quiet anger filled the kitchen. Greg denied everything. Then minimized everything. Then blamed misunderstandings. Then blamed coworkers. Eventually he stood. You've become paranoid. I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound surprised both of us, because it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone finally seeing reality. Paranoid. Yes, he grabbed his briefcase. Maybe you've spent too much time listening to your friends. There it was. The classic move. Attack the messenger. I shook my head. You forged my name. I didn't. You absolutely did. His face hardened. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he delivered the threat. If you keep pushing this, maybe we should discuss divorce. The word hung in the air. Divorce. 23 years reduced to a single sentence. Strangely, I didn't feel devastated. Not this time. Instead, I felt tired. Very tired. Because I finally understood something. Greg wasn't trying to save our marriage. He was trying to save himself. After he left the room, I sat alone at the kitchen table. Tucker wandered over and rested his head against my leg. I scratched behind his ears and cried. Not because of Greg. Because of uncertainty. I didn't know what happened next. I didn't know how much damage existed. I didn't know whether my finances were safe. I didn't know who would believe me. For a few days, I seriously considered giving up. Maybe I should walk away. Maybe I should stop digging. Maybe ignorance really was easier. Then Emily called. Our daughter had no idea what was happening. Yet somehow she sensed something. You sound sad. I'm okay. Mom, that single word broke me. A grown daughter can sometimes hear what nobody else can. I didn't tell her everything. Just enough. Silence followed. Then she said something I'll never forget. Whatever Dad did, don't protect him from consequences. Simple. Direct. Painfully true. A week later, I met with a family attorney in Noblesville named Karen Mitchell. She listened carefully, reviewed documents, asked questions. Lots of questions. By the end of the meeting, she looked serious. Start making copies of everything. Everything. That became my new routine. Emails, statements, records, notes, anything relevant. Meanwhile, life kept moving. Sometimes in ridiculous ways. One Saturday afternoon, Greg accidentally sent a text message intended for his mistress into our entire family group chat. Me, Emily, his sister, 2 cousins, everyone. The message read, "Can't stop thinking about last night." For nearly 3 minutes, nobody responded. Then Emily texted, "Well, this is awkward." His sister sent a single popcorn emoji. One cousin replied, "Wrong audience, Greg." I laughed so hard I nearly spilled coffee. For the first time in months, not because the situation was funny, because life occasionally inserts comedy into disaster. Greg left the group chat less than 5 minutes later. Emily still jokes about it. But underneath the humor, the truth remained. The walls around Greg were beginning to crack. And for the first time, I wasn't focused on revenge. I was focused on survival. Because the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. The affair was only the surface. The real disaster was still waiting underneath. By November, I was living 2 separate lives. The first was the one everyone saw. I volunteered, met friends for coffee, visited my mother on weekends, attended church on Sundays, smiled when people asked how things were going. The second life existed mostly in folders, bank statements, emails, expense reports, attorney meetings, phone calls with Frank. Every week seemed to reveal another piece of the puzzle, and every piece pointed in the same direction. Greg's problems were growing. Karen, my attorney, remained careful. "Don't rush." That became her favorite phrase. Whenever I wanted action, she said it. Whenever I wanted confrontation, she said it. Whenever I wanted revenge, she definitely said it. "Don't rush." I hated hearing it, mostly because she was right. Then an opportunity arrived. The company where Greg worked announced its annual charity banquet, a large event held every year in downtown Indianapolis. Business leaders, community partners, employees, local media, several hundred people attending. Greg was receiving a leadership award. The irony almost made me laugh. A leadership award. For a man secretly trying to outrun his own mistakes. The event was scheduled for a Friday evening at a hotel ballroom near Monument Circle. 2 weeks before the banquet, Frank called. "Diane!" His tone immediately got my attention. "What happened?" "The company hired outside investigators." I sat upright. "What kind of investigators?" "Forensic accountants." I knew enough to understand the significance. This wasn't routine anymore. Someone inside the company had become concerned. Very concerned. "Does Greg know?" "I suspect he does." That explained a lot. Lately, Greg looked exhausted. He was sleeping poorly, drinking more, snapping at people. The confident man I'd married seemed to be disappearing, and replacing him was someone constantly looking over his shoulder. The banquet arrived sooner than expected. I spent nearly an hour deciding whether to attend. Part of me wanted to stay home. Part of me wanted to forget the entire thing. But another part, the stronger part, needed to see it through. So I went. The ballroom looked exactly like every corporate banquet in America. Round tables, white tablecloths, expensive floral arrangements, a stage with giant screens, waiters carrying trays of drinks, people talking about business while pretending not to talk about business. I arrived alone. Several people greeted me warmly. Nobody seemed aware of the storm quietly approaching. Greg arrived about 20 minutes later. And yes, the blonde woman was there, not sitting beside him. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she sat several tables away among company employees. But their eyes found each other often. Far too often. I noticed. Others probably did too. The evening began normally. Dinner, awards, speeches, applause, more speeches. At one point, I wondered whether Karen had been wrong. Maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the investigation would take months. Maybe Greg would walk away untouched. Then he stepped onto the stage. The room applauded. Greg smiled, adjusted the microphone, and began speaking. For years, I would have been proud. That was the hardest part. I remembered the younger version of us. The newlyweds, the first house, the dreams, the sacrifices, the life we built. For a brief moment, I missed that man. Then he opened his mouth. Leadership is built on trust. I nearly choked on my water. The room nodded approvingly. Integrity matters. More applause. A woman at my table whispered, "He's such a great speaker." I looked down at my plate. Because if I looked up, I might start laughing. Or screaming. Possibly both. Then something unusual happened. Near the ballroom entrance, several people appeared. 3 men, 2 women. Business attire. Serious expressions. No smiles. I noticed them immediately. So did Greg. His voice faltered. Only briefly. But I saw it. A tiny crack. One of the newcomers spoke quietly with company executives. Another handed over paperwork. Conversations became tense. People started whispering. The atmosphere shifted. You could feel it, like humidity before a thunderstorm. Greg continued speaking, but now he looked distracted. Sweat appeared along his forehead. The executives no longer watched him. They were focused on the investigators. Within minutes, rumors spread throughout the ballroom. Nobody knew details, but everyone knew something was wrong. Karen, seated beside me, leaned closer. Stay calm. My heart hammered. What happens now? Truth. Simple answer. Powerful answer. Truth. One executive eventually approached the stage. He spoke quietly to Greg. The color drained from Greg's face. Exactly the way it had the day I saw the folder at the hotel. The same panic. The same fear. The same realization that events were no longer under his control. The room fell silent. Nobody understood what was happening. Yet everyone knew it mattered. Then one investigator asked a question. A very specific question. About financial authorizations. About signatures. About account approvals. Karen looked at me. It was time. For months I'd gathered records, documents, evidence, proof. Not because I wanted revenge, because I wanted protection. I stood. My knees actually shook. For a second I considered sitting back down, walking away, avoiding the spotlight. Then I remembered every lie, every manipulation, every forged signature, every sleepless night. And I kept standing. I never signed those documents. My voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The ballroom was already silent. Every head turned. Greg stared at me, horrified. I continued. My name was used without my permission. An investigator nodded. Another opened a folder. Several documents appeared. The forged signatures, the records, the inconsistencies. Everything Karen had prepared. The room watched. Nobody interrupted. Nobody laughed. Nobody defended Greg. Then something unexpected happened. The mistress panicked. A question was directed toward her. A simple question. One she clearly wasn't prepared for. Her answer contradicted Greg's. Immediately. Completely. The contradiction hung in the air. Visible. Undeniable. People exchanged looks. Executives frowned. Investigators took notes. And suddenly years of carefully maintained appearances collapsed. Not dramatically. Not explosively. Quietly. Like a building whose foundation finally gives way. Greg tried to explain. Then he tried to clarify. Then he tried to redirect blame. Nothing worked. Because facts don't care about performance. The room had heard enough. The room had seen enough. For months I'd imagined some grand moment of victory. A perfect revenge. A cinematic ending. Instead, the reality felt very different. There was no celebration. No cheering. No triumph. Only relief. The exhausting relief that comes when the truth finally stops hiding. As people began leaving the ballroom, Greg looked toward me. For a second I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not arrogance. Not confidence. Fear. Real fear. And for the first time since all of this began, I wasn't afraid of him anymore. People think the hardest part comes when the truth finally comes out. It doesn't. The hardest part comes afterward. When the adrenaline wears off, when the phone stops ringing, when the lawyers leave, when you're sitting alone in a quiet house wondering what your life looks like now. That's the part nobody talks about. The banquet happened on a Friday. By Monday morning, Greg's company had placed him on administrative leave. By Wednesday, his access to company systems had been suspended. 2 weeks later, he was gone. Officially. The announcement was brief, professional, carefully worded, but everyone understood what it meant. The investigation continued. I stayed focused on my own situation. Karen helped me separate my finances from Greg's. Every document felt important. Every signature mattered. Every meeting carried consequences. There were days I felt strong. There were days I barely wanted to get out of bed. Both were normal. At least that's what Karen kept telling me. One cold December afternoon, Greg called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. But curiosity won. Hello. His voice sounded different. Smaller somehow. Diane. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he said things got out of control. I stared out the kitchen window. Snow covered the backyard. Tucker was sleeping near the patio door. The peaceful scene felt strangely disconnected from the conversation. Things didn't get out of control, Greg. Silence. You made choices. Another silence. Then he tried something unexpected. Diane, I'm sorry. For years I imagined hearing those words. I thought they would feel satisfying. Instead, they felt empty. Not because I doubted he regretted everything, Because regret and accountability aren't the same thing. I'm sure you are. The conversation ended a few minutes later. There was no reconciliation. No dramatic closure. Just two people standing on opposite sides of consequences. A month later, the mistress disappeared from the picture, at least as far as I could tell. Several former co-workers mentioned she had resigned. Nobody seemed certain where she went afterward. I didn't care enough to ask. For a long time, I'd viewed her as the villain. Eventually, I realized she wasn't. She had made bad choices, so had Greg. But my real battle had never been with her. It had been with dishonesty, with manipulation, with the version of reality Greg had spent years constructing. The divorce process moved slowly, painfully slowly. If you've ever dealt with attorneys' paperwork or courts, you already know. Nothing happens as quickly as you want. There were negotiations, financial reviews, property discussions, endless forms. At times I felt overwhelmed. At times I felt angry. At times I missed the life I used to have. Not Greg. The life. There's a difference. By spring I sold our house in Carmel. That day surprised me emotionally. I expected relief. Instead I cried while packing dishes. I cried while emptying closets. I cried while removing family photos from walls. Not because I wanted to stay. Because memories are complicated. A house collects pieces of your life. Birthday parties. Christmas mornings. Ordinary Tuesday dinners. You can't put those into moving boxes. Eventually, I purchased a smaller place in Fishers. Nothing fancy. Nothing huge. Just mine. The first night there, I sat on the back patio with a cup of coffee and listened to birds settling into nearby trees. The silence felt different. Not lonely. Peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't wondering where Greg was. I wasn't checking excuses against facts. I wasn't questioning my own instincts. That freedom felt surprisingly valuable. Emily visited often. One afternoon we were assembling furniture I'd ordered online, a task that somehow required 3 hours, 2 screwdrivers, and vocabulary that would have disappointed my mother. At one point, Emily sat on the floor laughing. "You know something?" "What?" "I saw signs years ago." I looked up. "You did?" She nodded. "Not proof, just signs." I thought about that. Children often notice more than parents realize. Maybe she'd seen things I refused to see. Maybe love had made me overlook them. Or maybe I simply wasn't ready. Either way, the observation stayed with me. Several months later, Karen called with good news. The final financial reviews clearly established that I wasn't responsible for the forged documents. The relief hit harder than I expected. For nearly a year, I'd carried a quiet fear. What if someone blamed me? What if I couldn't prove the truth? Now I could finally let that fear go. That evening, Sharon came over with takeout from a local barbecue place. We sat in lawn chairs behind my house watching the sunset. At one point, she raised her plastic cup. "To survival," I laughed. "That's not exactly inspirational." "It doesn't need to be," she smiled. "Sometimes survival is the victory. The older I get, the more I think she was right." A few weeks later, I received one final text message from Greg. No apology. No explanation. Just a simple greeting. A door cracked open. An invitation to continue a conversation that had already taken too much from both of us. I looked at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Not angrily. Not dramatically. Quietly. And I went back to watering flowers. That small decision felt bigger than any confrontation. Because it wasn't about revenge. It was about moving forward. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that truth has a way of catching up with people. Sometimes quickly, sometimes painfully slowly. But eventually it arrives. And when it does, your job isn't to control the outcome. Your job is to face it honestly and protect your own peace. If you've ever had to rebuild after someone shattered your trust, know that you're not alone. Thank you for spending this time with me. And if this story meant something to you, feel free to share your thoughts or your own experience.